بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله، وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is lesson number 12, the 12th lesson on the explanation of the book Al-Uboodiyyah by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And in the previous lesson we finished making the point that just as a person, for example, when he feels the cold, then he seeks to remove the cold by putting on something warm. And likewise, when he feels hungry, he seeks to remove the hunger from himself. And so this is something natural. And likewise, when a person is exposed to something that he dislikes or is harmful, he seeks to remove it. So these examples were given to illustrate that in the same way, the same thing applies to issues of sin and disobedience, that a Muslim, he strives to remove these affairs. And this is in the context of the argument that we have been discussing over the previous few lessons, the argument by way of al-qadar, using the decree to justify one's sinful behavior. And this was the way of the polytheists, and it is also something that some of the sects fell into, those sects that we are discussing in the context of our discussion. So that's the point that we finished upon in the previous lesson. Today we're going to continue from where we left off. And so Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he continues to describe such people, and he says about them that those people who affirm the creational reality, which is to affirm Allah's rububiyyah, that He is the creator and the Lord of everything and the sustainer of everything, they basically say, or they hold, that because we are affirming this reality, because we affirm this reality, then this is something that prevents us from following Allah's commands and His prohibitions. Why? Because we've recognized the reality, because we know the reality, because we affirm the reality, which is Allah is the maker, creator, provider, sustainer, and so on and so forth, that we therefore do not need to abide by His commands and His prohibitions. And then in turn, when they fall into what Allah has prohibited of sins and disobedience, they then use the argument of Allah's decree, and they say that that if Allah willed, He could have prevented us from doing these deeds. But because He has willed these deeds, and because everything which occurs is from His decree, then therefore He must be pleased with it. So the Shaykh says that those people who outline this particular doctrine, who outline this particular view and this kind of reasoning, their statement, he says, وَقَوْلُ هَؤُلَاءِ شَرٌّ من قول اليهود والنصارى وهو من جنس قول المشركين الذين قالوا سيقول الذين أشركوا لو شاء الله ما أشركنا ولا آباؤنا ولا حرمنا من شيء. So he says that the statement of these types of people is more evil than the statement of the Jews and the Christians. And it is similar, it is of the same type of the statement of those pagans, the pagan Arabs, the ones who basically said, as Allah Azza wa Jal mentions about them, that those who commit shirk, they will soon say, if Allah had willed, we would not have committed shirk, nor our forefathers, and nor would we have declared anything to be unlawful. Likewise, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَلَوْ شَاءَ الرَّحْمَنُ مَا عَبَدَنَاهُم. This is another thing that the polytheists say, that if Ar-Rahman had willed, we would not have worshipped those idols. So this is the argument now, that if what we are doing of the polytheism, if the things that we are considering to be unlawful, that we are making things unlawful of our own accord, if all of this was wrong, then Allah Azza wa Jal would have prevented us from doing it. He wouldn't have decreed it upon us. Right? So this now is the argument. And so the Shaykh continues and he says that these people who bring this argument and this type of reasoning, they are the greatest of people in contradiction, in tanaqud. And this is something that we alluded to in previous lessons. And he says, بل كل من احتج بالقدر فإنه متناقض. That everyone who tried to justify his behavior and his actions by way of al-qadr, then he will be someone who contradicts himself. He will be in contradiction. Because, and then he explains the reason for this. The reason for this is that it is not possible for a person who holds this belief or who holds this idea to accept the action of every person, right? Because someone who comes along and who oppresses him, or who oppresses the people, or who strives to commit corruption upon the earth, and who basically spills the blood of people, and he does things which are unlawful. For example, he even might, for example, engage in rape and things of that nature, and violate the sanctities, and destroy people's lineage, and destroy the cultivation and things like that. Basically commit all this kind of corruption upon the earth, and all these various types of harms, which the people do not need, right? The people, it is a must for them to repel these types of harms and destruction, right? So a person, he will not affirm and accept all of these destructive actions from anyone, right? And if this was the case, the Shaykh continues, is that if someone was to come to him and was to do these things to you or to someone besides you, then you should leave them alone. You shouldn't do anything to them. And we know that this is not the case, right? And if you don't leave them alone, if you don't leave them to do all this harm and this oppression and this destruction and this damage to you or to other people, you just, then this means that your statement using qadar as an argument is false. And the Shaykh goes on to say that the people who use this speech or this argument, they are not consistent. They don't adhere to it themselves. Meaning when something comes to them and some harm comes to them, but when it comes to their desires and when they want to do sins and disobedience, then it suits them. But when some harm comes to them, then it doesn't suit them at all. And this is why some of the scholars, they made a remark, they made a statement to such people. They said, أنت عند الطاعة قدري وعند المصيبة جبري. So basically, the scholars said to these people that when it comes to the issue of obedience, you become a qadari. You become a qadari, meaning you are from those people who deny al-qadar. You deny it, right? You deny that there is al-qadar. But when it comes to sins and disobedience, you are a jabari, right? Which means that you now say, well, I was forced to do it. It's from Allah's decree and I had no choice, and so on and so forth. So basically this person is simply adopting different sayings in order to follow his desires. And so in a way we find, like, we can see even this contradiction even amongst the atheists today, for example, when they hold certain doctrines which suit them from one angle but which don't suit them from another angle. So for example, for an atheist who believes in evolution and everything came about by way of evolution and due to struggle between the species or among the species, and this is how life is and this is how variation came about, when you say to them that they use this to justify certain immoral behavior and certain things, because they don't want to be tied down by any morals. They don't believe there are any morals, and everything is just evolution, progress, things like that. There's no such thing as the lawful and the unlawful, moral and the immoral, things like that. So on that basis, they are happy to live like a liberal type of lifestyle, an open type of lifestyle. They don't want to be hindered in any way by laws or rules or regulations. This is a general way of thinking. But if you then come to them and say to them on the basis of this doctrine that if I took you and 100 other atheists and I had with me weapons and machine guns and I killed all of you, and then I just took over your possessions, I took your cars, your possessions, your belonging, your wealth, and I took it, that's evolution. That's just the struggle of, the evolutionary struggle. And, the strong are the ones who survive. And this is all about survival of the fittest. And it just so happens that I'm the one who's stronger than you. I took over you or eliminated you. And I'm the one who's standing and you're the one who's eliminated. That's just evolution. Tell me, why is that wrong? Tell me, why is that wrong? Why should you have any reason to complain about this? And then they can't answer. Yeah, and then they can't now start using the argument of, well, right and wrong and moral and all the other, because they have to accept that. That's just how it is. So this type of argument, like the people use by way of al-qadar, that it's Allah's decree, and if He decreed that I'm going to sin, then so be it. Allah must be pleased with it. And so in the same way we see the atheists do the same thing, except that here they are simply invoking the issue of evolution, right, as a creative force. So they are obviously more misguided and more foolish because of their rejection of Allah's rububiyyah. So anyhow, moving on from this point, Shaykh al-Fawzan, hafidhahullah, he basically summarizes for us the various groups that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is alluding to on this issue of al-qadar, and also on the issue of adhering to the Sharia, to the commands and prohibitions. There are 3 or 4 groups. The first group are they are the Mu'tazila, they are the Qadariyya, they are the ones who basically they affirm Allah's commands and His prohibitions, but they deny al-qadar. They deny al-qadar. What does this mean? It means that they say Allah Azza wa Jal does not will our actions. He does not decree our actions. He does not create our actions. Rather, we are the ones who choose them, and we do them, and we create them. And Allah Azza wa Jal does not have any role in this or any involvement in this. Then at the same time, they say that we are required to abide by Allah's commands and His prohibitions. So what is their position? Their position is that they affirm the Sharia, they affirm the command and the prohibition, but they deny al-qadar. They deny al-qadar. So this is the Qadari, the Mu'tazila or the Qadariyya. This is one group. The second group are those who basically say, we affirm al-qadar. They affirm al-qadar in an exaggerated way. So what they mean by this is that a person is forced and compelled to do his actions. And because he's forced and compelled to do his actions, then really the command and the prohibition doesn't really apply to him. Right? So if you are forced to do what you do, if you've got no choice, then all of the actions you are doing are not really voluntary. It is really Allah who is the actor. Allah is the one who is the doer in their view. And so therefore, no one can really adhere to the commands and the prohibitions because they are being forced in everything that they do. So here now, these are the Jabariyya, right? They are the opposite of the Mu'tazila. They exaggerate in al-qadar. They say everybody is compelled, and they deny, they negate the command and the prohibition. So this is the other way around compared to the Mu'tazila. Now, of these two groups, which of these two groups are in the better position? The group in the better position is the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila. Why? Because they at least affirm the Sharia and the command and the prohibition, and they venerate the command and the prohibition, and they abide and call others to abide by it. Whereas the Jabariyya, they negate the command and the prohibition. These are the people, as we said, who basically say, because Allah, because we are really forced to do what we do, we don't really have any free will. It is Allah, the one who is doing all the actions and creating all the actions, and we only have an illusion of choice. It's not really a choice. So if this is the case, then really we can't really be acting upon any commands and prohibitions, because this then would become irrelevant. So this is a more evil statement than the statement of the Mu'tazila, because at least, despite their misguidance on the issue of al-qadr, at least they maintain and accept that there is a legislation and that we have to abide by a legislation, and that legislation brings, rectification, law, order, and things like that, benefit to the society. So their position is a much better one, even though it is obviously misguided. Then the third position, the third viewpoint, is that of the Sufis. And the Sufis, what they say is that the commands and the prohibitions, this is really for the common people, for the ignorant people, the common people who don't really know the higher truths, the realities like we do. So for the common people, they must stick to the Sharia, like the prayer and the fasting and the Hajj and things like that, and do all of the commands and keep prohibitions. This is just something they need to do to keep them in order. But it's because they don't really have the ability to understand and appreciate the higher philosophical things, the higher truths, the higher realities, like we are able to know. And so these are what they call the Amma, the common people, the common folk, the general folk. And as for the elite, the khasa, the specific folk, the elite people, which is, themselves, they say that because we know of these realities about the creation, that only Allah exists and there is only one entity, it is Allah, and everything is one, and this is the real meaning of Tawheed, meaning that there isn't the creation and the created, there is only the Creator, Allah, and nothing else, right? That because we've recognized that this is the real truth, then since everything is Allah, then the worshipper is the same as the worshipped, and the obeyed one is the same as the one who obeys. And so therefore there's no halal, there's no haram, there's no command, there's no prohibition. Everything that exists is just Allah Azza wa Jal. It's a manifestation of Him, and that's all there is. So this now is the saying of the extreme Sufis, and this is, a really evil, repugnant statement. And obviously then there's Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the people upon the way of the truth, upon the Sunnah, and they believe in Al-Qadr, and they affirm the Sharia as well. They combine the two things. There's no contradiction. We believe in Al-Qadr, that Allah Azza wa Jal, He creates and He decrees and He wills, and He gave us abilities and He gave us guidance, and we affirm the legislation, that we have to abide by the command and the prohibition. And there's no contradiction between the two whatsoever. So these are the various groups that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, which he basically mentions here. And then he continues speaking about these people and says that these people use the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Worship your Lord until there comes to you the certainty. The certainty. And again, we discussed this earlier in a previous lesson. Ibn Taymiyyah is repeating the same point again. So basically they misinterpret this verse. They claim that this means continue worshipping your Lord until the certainty, the true belief comes to you. So what they mean by this is that people should continue worshipping Allah until they finally realize the real truth, the hidden truth, which is nothing exists except Allah. All that exists is Allah and nothing else. And so once this certainty comes to you, then you no longer need to worship Allah. And so this is a distortion of this verse. It does not mean this at all. Rather, the meaning of it is that Allah Azza wa Jal is saying to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, continue worshipping your Lord up until that which is certain, meaning death, comes to you. So keep worshipping your Lord right up until the point of death. In fact, this verse is a refutation of the misguidance of those people, of those extremist Sufis. So, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, that here in this ayah, وَجَعَلُوا الْيَقِينَ هُوَ مَعْرِفَةُ هَذِهِ الْحَقِيقَةِ وَقَوْلُ هَؤُلَاءِ كُفْرٌ صَرِيحٌ. He says, those people, they explained al-yaqeen, certainty, in this verse to mean to have knowledge of the reality. What reality? That Allah is everything and everything is Allah, and that there is only the created. There's no such thing as the creator and the created. It is only Allah, right? So in other words, once you know this, then you no longer need to worship Allah. The halal and the haram doesn't apply to you. The command and the prohibition doesn't apply to you. Now this statement is clear disbelief. This is the ruling upon such a statement. This is clear disbelief. And then he goes on to explain that, he goes on to say that, he says here that some people fell into this and they didn't know it was disbelief. They entered into this statement, this evil doctrine, and they didn't know that it was actually disbelief. However, Ibn Taymiyyah says that there are some things which are known by necessity from the religion of Islam, meaning that they are so well known, so well spread and propagated, right, that they are known by necessity. You simply cannot not know them. You have to know them. And for example, from those things is that every single person, he is obliged to follow the commands and the prohibitions. And so long as he is a sane person, he is sane, meaning that he's got his rational faculties, so long as he is alive and he is sane, it's known by necessity that a person must abide by, the command and the prohibition. And that this isn't removed from him, it's not removed from him for any reason, and he's still obligated to abide by the command and the prohibition. So once he's informed about this, and in case he's ignorant and he didn't know, and he's informed about this, that look, this is something you can't be ignorant of because this is something known by necessity in the religion. Once this doubt is removed from him, and then he continues to use this argument and this position, then in this case, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, then this person is referred to the authorities, because this now is clear, manifest disbelief. And then he goes on after this, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and he speaks of some people who basically believe that they don't need to pray because they experience worship in their hearts, because they experience spirituality and these feelings in the heart, that the prayer does not really apply to them. They don't need to really pray. Or some of them say, for example, that drinking alcohol, it's okay for him because he can handle it. He's able to handle, he won't get intoxicated, and his body is strong. And he is from the special, unique people who will not be harmed by alcohol in his health or in any other way. And likewise, some people who say that it's okay for me to commit sins and disobedience and to enter into fornication and shameful deeds and things like that, because these things won't harm me. I am like the ocean, which if you throw filth into the ocean, it's not going to harm the ocean. The ocean is so vast and huge, it's such a huge volume of water, that a few impurities here and there is not going to harm the ocean. So these are some other types of false arguments which are used by people for them to justify why they do not need to abide by the Sharia. And sometimes you do come across people like this. There are people like this who you come across, and they've been affected by this philosophy and these evil doctrines, and maybe they've been reading even some of the books of Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy or whatever it might be, and they come up with these ideas. And all of this is clear, plain, manifest disbelief. Now after this, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he goes on to say that these people, these types of people, they basically resemble the pagans which are mentioned in the Quran. Because the pagans who are mentioned in the Quran, he says that they revolve around two things. He says, وَلَا رَيْبَ أَنَّ الْمُشْرِكِينَ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبَ الرُّسُلَ يترددون بين البدعة المخالفة لشرع الله وبين الاحتجاج بالقدر على مخالفة أمر الله. So he says that there's no doubt that the pagans who rejected the messengers, they revolved around two things. One of them is that they innovated into their religion that which opposed Allah's legislation. So they innovated certain things into their religion, acts of worship and certain rulings to do with the halal and the haram, right? So they entered these things into the Sharia. And secondly, into the religion. And secondly, the second thing that they did is that they tried to use al-qadr as an argument to justify their sin, disobedience, and their polytheism and their disbelief. So he says, likewise, these people who ascribe to Islam, these various sects, who fell into these ideas and these notions, and as a result of which they either, they affirmed al-qadr, yet they denied the command and the prohibition, or they said that the command and the prohibition is just for the common people, the ignorant common people, it doesn't actually apply to us, right? So these types of groups, they resemble the pagans who are mentioned in the Quran and who did these two things, innovate into the religion and use al-qadr as an argument. So then Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he goes on to mention some proofs from the Quran for this. These are verses that some of the verses that were mentioned before. So from these verses is the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا وَاللَّهُ أَمَرَنَا بِهَا قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So he says about the polytheists, when they do something that is shameful, a shameful deed, and this is a reference to how they used to walk around naked and how they used to make a tawaf, for example, do certain acts of worship while they were naked. And so they would say that when they do such shameful deeds, they would say, this is what we found our forefathers upon, and Allah commanded us with this. And so Allah responded, say, Allah does not command with what is shameful. Do you say upon Allah that of which you have no knowledge? So here what they try to do is they try to innovate something into the religion which is not from it. And so Allah Azza wa Jal rebuked them for that, for speaking without knowledge, and that He does not command that which is shameful in His religion. So this is basically innovating into the religion what is not from it. And as for the other mistake, which is arguing by way of al-qadr, then here Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he mentions the verse, سيقول الذين أشركوا لو شاء الله ما أشركنا ولا آباؤنا ولا حرمنا من شيء. Soon will those who commit shirk, will they say, if Allah had so willed, we would not have committed shirk, and nor would have our forefathers declared, and nor would our forefathers, and nor would we have declared anything to be unlawful. Anything to be unlawful. So Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, he emphasizes, he repeats all of this, and he mentions the full verse, قُلْ أَمَرَ رَبِّي بِالْقِسْطِ. Say, my Lord has commanded with that which is just. وَأَقِيمُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ وَادْعُوهُ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ كَمَا بَدَأَكُمْ تَعُودُونَ. So Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan completes the actual passage, and he says that in this passage Allah Azza wa Jal makes it clear that He does not command that which is shameful, and rather He has commanded that which is justice, al-qist, and He's commanded that you are sincere to Allah, that you turn your faces sincerely for His worship in every mosque, that you call upon Him alone sincerely, this is what Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded. He does not command, with oppression, with injustice, with what is shameful, with what is, shirk and things like that. He doesn't command those things. So he's refuting the polytheists who altered their religion and entered into the religion what was not from it. Just like he also refuted those who tried to use the argument of Al-Qadr. So basically, in essence, these two traits, these two qualities of innovating things into the religion, making the halal to be haram, the haram to be halal, innovating acts of worship that Allah didn't command, innovating shameful things that Allah didn't command. This is one aspect of the mistake of the polytheists. And the second aspect is to try and use Al-Qadr as an argument to justify their wrongdoings. And so these two traits are things which also crept into those sects that we mentioned, those groups that Ibn Taymiyyah is discussing, from the Sufis who fell into this, and the people of Kalam, the people of like philosophy and Tasawwuf or Sufism. And so this is what he's going to discuss next. He's going to mention that these particular groups specifically are the ones who fell into this. And so inshallah what we'll do is we can end our lesson here for today. We'll continue up that discussion inshallah ta'ala in the lesson to follow. So basically, in essence, where we've arrived at so far is we've spoken about the importance of the religious reality, al-haqiqah ad-diniyah, that this is what Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded His creation with, that we abide and act by the religious reality, which is His tawheed, which is His sharia, which is His command and His prohibition, and that it is not sufficient just to believe that if you accept Allah as the creator, provider, owner, sustainer, that this is all there is, and that thereafter anything you do is justifiable by way of Al-Qadr. All of this is wrong. And if you start entering into this and start falling into this, then you will be led to the greatest of disbelief, and you will negate the Sharia and the command and the prohibition, and that is the very basis of rectification. And so this will lead to tremendous evil, and this is something which actually did happen in the Muslim nation, where there were various groups and sects who basically entered into these various statements. So we're going to end the lesson here today inshallah, and we'll continue this discussion in the following lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.